Today, we want to show you a prophetic shift that occurred when the Temple Mount came back into Jewish hands, opening the door to the building of the third Jewish temple. Some called it a kiss from heaven.
The people of Israel to have the courage to fulfill the will of God of the rebuilding of the temple.
Deep within the ancient city of Jerusalem, a question has lingered for centuries. A question that has left scholars and believers alike pondering its answer with great curiosity and suspense. It's a question that has divided nations and sparked heated debates. The question is simple yet profound. Will Israel restore the Grand Temple on the original temple location in Jerusalem, Temple Mount? For questions, the topic of the Third Temple has been a source of great discussion and disagreement. Some believe that the restoration of the temple is part of the promised destiny in the biblical covenants with the Jews and the land of Israel. For these believers, the Third Temple is not just a symbol of hope and renewal, but a literal event that will come to pass. Others, however, view the Third Temple as a spiritual interpretation. They see it as a metaphorical representation of a renewed connection with God and His people. And yet others use the idea of the Third Temple as a source of inspiration in their daily lives, a reminder of the hope and renewal that is possible for all. However, current developments suggest that the construction of the temple is now in progress. Is this claim accurate? And more importantly, what implications does this have for the future? Let's delve deeper and uncover the truth. For centuries, people have debated the literal interpretation of biblical passages about the Third Temple. Some argue that it's a metaphorical concept, referring to spiritual promises rather than a physical structure. They believe that the church has replaced the temple, as Christ is the new temple, and His death and resurrection symbolize its rebuilding. However, according to the prophecy of the New Covenant in Jeremiah, the Messiah will rule from Jerusalem in the Messianic age, and the temple will be rebuilt with the Levite priesthood. So, what are the signs of preparation for a third temple in Israel today? Since 1987, the temple movement has been slowly progressing in its efforts to see the temple rebuilt in the 21st century. While a large percentage of Jewish people are secular, Orthodox Jews have been at the forefront of this movement. They don't believe that the rebuilding of the temple is a physical work, but rather a spiritual one, and only they are qualified to see it done correctly. They have revived the Sanhedrin, the religious body responsible for the temple's halakhic issues, and intend to see it rebuilt properly. Are we witnessing the beginning of the fulfillment of this prophecy, or is it just a far-fetched dream? Let's go back in time to reveal all the secrets. Imagine a magnificent temple in Jerusalem, its grandeur and significance in biblical history. For centuries, scholars and religious leaders have debated the fate of the Second Temple, destroyed in 70 AD and now missing in Jerusalem. Many believe that its restoration is crucial for the final sacrifices to end, as foretold in the Bible. So, when will the Third Temple be built, and what does the Bible say about its potential construction date? To understand the Third Temple, we need to look back at the history and significance of the first two temples. King David, who built the first permanent home to honor the God of the Bible, had a vision to construct a grand structure for God. However, God forbade him from doing so and promised to make David a house instead. This signified that David's reign would be fixed permanently. His son would be his heir, and his son would build a house in God's name. Solomon, David's son, constructed the Lord's house, which was also called Solomon's Temple, on Mount Moriah in Jerusalem, as prophesied by God. This temple served as Israel's primary place of worship after it was completed during the reign of Solomon. It stood for almost 400 years before being destroyed by the Babylonians in 586 BC. The Jews were allowed to return to Jerusalem by decree of King Cyrus after 70 years of captivity in the Babylonian Empire and begin rebuilding the temple. God prophesied this before Cyrus was even born. The rebuilding of the temple faced opposition from neighboring peoples and laxity among the Jews themselves, but it was eventually rebuilt around 515 BC on the same site. This second temple was called the Temple of Zerubbabel by many sources, as he helped coordinate its construction as the governor of Judah. This temple was still standing when Jesus was on earth. but it was greatly restored by King Herod and became known as Herod's Temple. It stood for nearly 600 years until the Romans destroyed it in 70 AD. The idea of rebuilding the Third Temple holds immense importance for Orthodox Jews, as they believe it plays a crucial role in the world's redemption. Gershon Solomon, the director of Temple Mount Faithful, is a prominent figure who is leading the movement for the reconstruction of the temple. His organization is actively involved in protests at the temple site and other related activities to prepare Israeli society to accept and support this endeavor. Solomon firmly believes that the redemption work in the homeland of the biblical people cannot be completed without the Third Temple. He believes that the Temple Mount is the core of Israel's state and way of life. However, there are religious Jews who oppose this idea, as they have embraced a diaspora mentality and a spiritualized way of thought that doesn't place hope in the physical fulfillment of biblical prophecies regarding a future temple. For many, the current state of the Temple Mount, where Muslims have control, is seen as satisfactory. However, for Jewish leaders in the temple movement, the absence of the divine presence in the world is hindering the Jewish people from living up to their spiritual potential. It's no surprise then that people often ask what the Bible has to say about the Third Temple, given the importance of the temple in ancient Israel's history. While the Bible's reference to another temple may not be entirely clear-cut, there are 3 notable mentions of it. 2 of them are direct references to physical temples, while the third is metaphorical. The book of Daniel talks about the end of sacrifices and a terrible desolation that will precede the end times. This abomination of desolation is described as a heinous destroyer, the likes of which can only be expressed in words like abominable and filthy. Many scholars believe that this prophecy may have been fulfilled during the reign of Antiochus Epiphanes, also known as King of the North, who outlawed Jewish worship and replaced the altar with one dedicated to Zeus. This act of sacrilege resulted in the defilement of the temple, which was considered a grave offense in Jewish culture. The Bible has many prophecies about the end times, and the destruction of the temple is one of them. While the destruction of the temple by Romans in 70 AD may seem like a fulfillment of this prophecy, Jesus' later words suggest that it has yet to be fulfilled. According to Matthew 24, an abominable desolation will stand in a holy place as a sign that the end times are near. This prophecy is also mentioned in Daniel 12, which describes the end times as the time when the daily sacrifice is taken away and the abomination of desolation is established. However, this prophecy has not been fulfilled yet, as the Jews no longer engage in sacrificial rites. For this prophecy to come true, sacrifice must first be reintroduced and then abolished, followed by the establishment of an unclean sanctuary. The fulfillment of this prophecy is essential to the Third Temple movement, and it's why many Jews believe that the temple must be rebuilt to usher in the end times. Ezekiel 40 provides evidence that the Third Temple will be built during the end times. Ezekiel describes the temple in detail, providing specifications for its construction. When Ezekiel received this message from God, some believed he was referring to Solomon's temple, which had already been built and destroyed. Others speculated that he was talking about the Second Temple or King Herod's project to reconstruct it. However, the architecture and features described in Ezekiel are different from those of past temples. For example, Ezekiel mentions a river flowing from the temple, which is absent in previous designs. This detailed vision of the temple indicates that it has yet to be built. Ezekiel's description is most likely a temple that will be constructed for Israel during the millennium, a time when the nations will no longer be divided into 2 kingdoms. During this period, God will dwell among the Israelites, and His Spirit will be poured forth on the house of Israel. 2 further indications of the millennial period are the healing waters emanating from the temple and the city of Jerusalem being renamed to the Lord. Moving forward, the New Testament contains several references that describe God's people as spiritual temples. It's interesting to note that this symbolic interpretation was given even as the physical temples of Zerubbabel and Herod still stood. Paul asked the members of the Church of God in Corinth if they were aware that they were God's temple and that the Spirit of God resided within them. He warned them that if anyone defiled them, they would suffer the consequences. Paul reiterated this point in Corinthians 6:16, where he reminded the Corinthians that they were the temple of the living God. In Ephesians, he also spoke of the members of the church becoming a holy temple in the Lord. Through this symbolism, Paul explained that God promised to dwell in us through the indwelling of the Holy Spirit, that we repent of our sins and are baptized. Our glorious hope is to have Christ in us, which is how we can become God's temple. There have been several significant attempts to construct the third temple, all of which have failed. In 361 AD, Emperor Julian of Rome granted permission to the Jews to rebuild the temple. However, multiple historical accounts report that the project was abandoned due to frequent fires and earthquakes, including the Galilee earthquake in 363 AD. Later, in 601 AD, the Byzantine Empire was expelled from the Middle East and the Jews regained control of Jerusalem. But when the Persians took over the area and handed it to the Christians, they destroyed the almost finished temple and left the site in ruins. The temple project had only just begun when the Persians took over. The international community staunchly rejects Israel's claim to build the temple in Jerusalem and even disputes their ownership of the Temple Mount. Israeli law prohibits Jews from worshipping at the site, and Muslim groups such as the Women in Black vigilantly monitor Jewish presence there. Islamic authorities officially deny the existence of a temple at the location. However, recent events have boosted the prospects of rebuilding the temple, and it may be accomplished in our lifetimes, except for the issue of finding suitable land to build it on. While the physical temple will exist during the millennium, and the spiritual temple Paul talked about is already being built, it remains uncertain if the Jews will construct another physical temple before the return of Jesus Christ. The Sanhedrin has made arrangements for the re-establishment of future temple service, which involves various preparations. One such project is the planting of the biblical temple forest, which will meet the agricultural needs of the third temple. According to Rabbi Hillel Weiss, who is a spokesperson for the Sanhedrin, the temple acts as a connection between the divine and the land. He further explained that when people think about sacrifices, they usually think of animals and blood, but most of the offerings were actually from plants grown around Israel. Rabbi Richman, a member of the Sanhedrin, is leading a project to bring back the sacred red heifer to Israel. The ashes of the red heifer mixed with water are necessary for purifying Jews to enable them to do service in the temple, according to Numbers 19. During the span of approximately 1,000 years, when the first and second temples existed, only 9 red heifers were used to prepare the waters used to purify Jews. According to Jewish tradition, the 10th one will be used by the Messiah. The Temple Institute's rabbis, including Richman, are providing guidance and supervision in partnership with an Israeli cattleman who is an expert in animal husbandry. He is using the technique of implanting the frozen embryos of the Red Angus cattle, which originally come from North America, into Israeli domestic cattle. It's impossible to transport a red heifer to Israel for use in the red heifer ceremony, because it cannot have ever worn a yoke and must be born in the land of Israel. The project is the result of years of research that blends ancient religious texts with modern science. The Sanhedrin and the Temple movement conduct reenactments of temple ceremonies to train Kohanim, the priestly class. This training involves specialized education on the priest's responsibilities, the use of ritual objects intended for the third temple, and practice on a newly constructed altar for burnt offerings. This altar is unique because it can be disassembled and quickly reassembled at its permanent location on the Temple Mount in Mount Moriah, where the people of Israel must exclusively build an altar. When the right time comes, it will be reassembled on the mount, allowing the sacrificial service to resume immediately. The Temple Institute has also made another recent discovery, which is the revival of the technique used for producing biblical crimson. This dye was used in various important temple items, such as the high priest's garments and the parochet, which was a massive curtain separating the Holy of Holies from the holy place. Moreover, the crimson dye was used in the mixture with the ashes of the red heifer. Professor Zohar Amar from Bar Ilan University found that the eggs of the Tola Shani, also known as the crimson worm, found in modern-day Israel would produce the biblical crimson dye. Israel's Supreme Court has stated that the situation on the Temple Mount is very complicated and not easy to resolve in its ruling opinion on the issue of the works on the Temple Mount. According to the court, this is one of those cases where a judicial ruling is not the best way to settle the dispute, and the decision should be made by the political authorities. It is the political echelon, not the court, who must decide the issue and give meaning to the historical call that the Temple Mount is Israel's. In other words, it is a political rather than legal matter. Those who understand the prophecy of Daniel's 17th week, Daniel 9:27, believe that a future political leader, the Antichrist of Revelation 13, will one day make a deceptive covenant with Jewish leaders, leading to the rebuilding of the Third Temple. What are the chances of this happening? One possibility was found in an academic book on the politics of the Temple Mount. Given the emphasis upon the international community's interest in the sites under the concept of heritage of humankind, representatives from the international community need to be included as mediators and guarantors. These would most likely come from the United Nations, UNESCO, and would be drawn from regional powers like the Arab League, NATO, or interested states like the United States, the European Union, and Russia. Any proposed legal regime will necessitate interfaith cooperation among regional religious leaders. It could be supplemented by international religious leaders acting as mediators. It is exciting to see these developments in the land of Israel regarding the construction of a third temple as people eagerly await the Messiah's second coming. But there's another mystery connected to Jerusalem. Is the Ark of the Covenant kept in the Dome of the Rock? Some people will say that the Ark of the Covenant is lost forever. Undeniably, many people over the past 2,000 years have looked for it without success. Indeed, there are those who think it can never be located. But rather than being lost, it has been carefully concealed, and the location is not beyond our ability to discern. Let's first establish where the Ark of the Covenant is not before we can talk about where it might be. Some believe it was destroyed during the Babylonian invasion of Jerusalem in 586 BC. This view is mentioned alongside many divergent Talmudic opinions on the subject in the Apocalypse of Ezra, written in the 1st century AD. It's unlikely though. Josiah's reign ended in 609 BC, more than 2 decades before the Babylonian conquest, and Jeremiah makes reference to the removal of the Ark during that time. Furthermore, the Ark is not included in either Jeremiah's lists or the official record of sacred objects stolen by the Babylonians. But if the Babylonians didn't steal the Ark, then what became of it? Even before the Second Temple was built, its absence was obviously recognized because it is conspicuously absent from Ezekiel's visionary restored temple, Ezekiel 40-48. It should come as no surprise then that no ancient authority ever reported seeing an Ark in the Second Temple. No new Ark was ever built, despite the fact that the restoration of God's glory was dependent on its rediscovery in the books of Maccabees, which stand in for institutional Judaism in the 2nd century BC. If that's the case, then why do we keep asking, where is the Ark of the Covenant? The Bible's relative silence on the topic is striking. How did Israel's cynosure of faith fade away so quietly? It implies that the Ark was removed with Judah's rulers and temple officials' knowledge. Someone, just like they did with other artifacts, would have surely documented the loss for future generations. The final chapters of Chronicles, which conclude the Jewish Bible, could contain the final information on the Ark. It has been placed in the temple, and the people have been summoned to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple. This is undoubtedly a warning to future generations of Judahites to travel to Jerusalem and find the Ark, the reason for the temple's existence, and rebuild the temple around it, as some have already done. But if the Ark is still hidden in the same location as Josiah and his men, where could it be? David transformed the mountaintop into a flat surface supported by a substructure with tunnels, chambers, and cisterns running beneath the mount itself when preparing the site for the temple. Like one of the Great Pyramids, a cross-section of the mount would reveal secret chambers and passageways. David had a legitimate reason for doing so. The temple was to be the most important structure in Israel. It was to house the national treasury, sacred scriptures, and Israel's genealogical records. It was to be the home of the nation's most sacred artifacts, including the Ark of the Covenant. As a result, the mount needed to be well supplied with hidden vaults in order to be safe from any potential threat. Since the temple's destruction in AD 70, the mount has been neglected, profaned, disputed, conquered, and built upon. However, it has never been excavated. The Byzantines turned the mount into a garbage dump in retaliation for the Judeo-Persian attack on Christian Jerusalem in AD 614. Caliph Abd al-Malik built a shrine exactly where the temple once stood after the Muslim conquest, which has remained in place to this day. The passages beneath the mount, on the other hand, remained sealed throughout the ages. So by far the most likely scenario is that Josiah's Kohanim hid the Ark in the Temple Mount tunnels. What do you think? Share your thoughts in the comments down below.